Our last speaker is Larry Kramer.
Plague! We are in the middle of a fucking plague! Plague! 40 million infected people is a fucking plague! And nobody acts as if it is. Nobody in this hospital. Nobody in this city. Nobody in this world. 40 million people is a fucking plague! Every person I talk to in every city, in every agency, gay, straight, AIDS, is as despondent as they can possibly be. Nobody knows what to do next. Nobody knows what to do next. Of this epidemic, nobody is in charge. We're sending a message to public officials, to closeted public officials, that we won't be shat on anymore.
New York City, your mayor is gay. Put some pressure on the FDA.
Do you know what it's like to have 18 of your own friends in a year and a half die? Men who are at the height of their creative usefulness to society, all men under 50 years old. I don't think the straight community has any concept of what it's like to be a gay man in this city. It's like living in wartime. You don't know when the bomb is going to fall. Who's it going to hit? What is this mysterious thing that is in who? Do I have it?
You can get it too! You can get it too! You can get it too!
Bodies are piled in doorways even as we speak, AIDS people in this city. Thousands of homeless in shelters at night.
How many more have to die before you join the fight? How many more have to die before you join the fight?
Larry crystallized the rage that so many people were coming to feel about the absolute lack of response by the government to this crisis that was devastating one community after another.
This is yet another president and yet another health secretary who do not care about AIDS. Why are we kissing this president's ass?
I think the whole world changed because of this one man. This is important. You have to treat this with urgency.
Why do you think that there is no sense of urgency in Washington for this issue?
Why? Because this disease is happening to faggots, niggers, spics, junkies, and hookers. That's why.
He can be full of rage. And you almost think of like the Old Testament prophet.
Why can't you call a plague a plague? Every time you say the words AIDS epidemic, you are lying. You must learn to say the words AIDS plague, plague of AIDS, plague, plague, plague. We have to start being powerful or we are going to die. It is up to us right now.
Certain generation of gay men have reason to believe that Larry saved their lives.
He was unafraid of being unpopular. He was brave. He was tenacious, extremely complicated, and a great writer.
You can only find room to call yourself normal.
You make me sound like I'm the enemy.
I'm beginning to think that you and your straight world are our enemy. I'm furious with you. and with myself, and with every goddamn doctor who ever told me I'm sick and interfered with my loving a man. I'm trying to understand why nobody wants to hear that we're dying, why my own brother doesn't want to help.
This isn't just this angry gay play. This is a great American play. It is a story of one person who said no. Not happening. No. And then someone else said no, standing next to him, and then someone else joined in and said no. And that's how you start a movement. And that's how you change the world.
Oh, my brothers and sisters, embrace the danger of life. We are here. We are alive. We are together. We are united. The future we have waited so long to live is here on this very day. But now, harder than ever, we must act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
Hey, Larry. Larry. Larry, you want some applesauce? Very little at a time. We're going to take it nice and slow.
We're going to put more in some.
Want to try some pudding?
No. I just want to go home. And I feel shitty. I need more blankets. Good. Thanks, Chief.
Of course.
It should be eliminated.
I don't know what to say to you, Larry. It's hard. It's hard to see you like this. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hard for me, too. I just want to go home.
When I was a kid, I was very unhappy, lonely, shy, very shy, not too many friends. I lived in my own imagination a lot. I performed. My bedroom was a stage, and I performed. And I played LPs from Broadway shows, and I would dance and sing with them. I lived in my own world.
Who cares if my boat goes upstream, or if the gale bids me go with the river's flow? I drift along with my fancy. Sometimes I thank my lucky stars my heart is free. Or Mary Martin in South Pacific. One dream in my heart, one love to be living for. And I'm performing on the biggest stage, and everybody's applauding me like crazy. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you very much.
Did I know I was unhappy? No, probably not. I hated my father. He was not a happy man, and he was pretty much a failure. He was the only person that I had the guts to fight with. He called me a sissy all the time. My brother was the athlete. My brother had all the Butch honors. He was a boxing champion of Yale, and he was honor society everywhere. Although I adored him, I had to find other ways to excel. I was interested in the things that my father thought were sissy things, the theater, movies, whatever, and he didn't like it.
Your son is a sissy.
He's your son, too.
If he were my son, he wouldn't be wearing a dress. If he were my son, he'd be going to the ball game with me instead of your la-la-la theater. Look at him. He's a sissy. Sissy, sissy.
Richard, stop it!
No!
No, they're the most precious things I have!
I'm gonna do this again!
No, don't do this to the boy!
We don't sissies!
My father and I fought like tigers, screamed at each other all the time. I may have been unhappy and I may have been shy, which I still am, but I knew how to yell back at him. My mother was very much a teacher and an exceedingly moral woman. She took a great deal of pride in her work. My mother ran a suburban chapter of the American Red Cross. She was called the Home Service Director, basically the second person in charge. When I was a kid, I was taken to families whose kids had rheumatic fever, and I was put to work on the bloodmobile. It was our duty to help.
My father hated that she did it because she liked it. And she was so obviously so happy in her work, and he hated his. And everybody kissed her feet because she just did good everywhere. But she wasn't there as a mother. I always came home to an apartment that was empty.
I had my first sex in 7th grade with another guy. And we did it over many months. While it was he who suggested it, it was I who incited it by telling him of a dirty story I had read. And he said, oh, let's do that. We did it and then decided we wouldn't do it again. And one of us would always call the other after a little while and we'd do it again. I ran into this kid whose name was Larry, also with a bunch of other guys, and they made fun of me as a faggot, was a sissy, and that really hurt. This guy who I'd had all this sex with. It was at Yale that I had to come face to face with it freshman year.
I thought I was the only gay kid there at Yale. I had no sense there was anyone else like us, me.
You would sometimes see gay men together at a concert or a play, but it was hidden. It was hidden. An unknown universe, an unknown culture, and parallel but unknown.
There weren't any gay people. If someone had come to me freshman year at Yale and said, how many gay people are in your class? I would have said, I don't think there are any gay people in the class. There may be some people who have had bad experiences with girls.
Nothing was going right. I was flunking exams. I was very unhappy. I didn't know why. And then one weekend, I ate 200 aspirin. Somebody found me, and when I woke up, I had had my stomach pumped and all that.
The night that his brother and new wife came back from their honeymoon to their Greenwich Village apartment, Yale called to say, your brother just tried to kill himself or is unhappy and you need to come up.
I'd be dead if it weren't for him. He's the one that saw that I was in trouble and got me to my first drink when I tried to kill myself at Yale.
Arthur Kramer is the best big brother I have ever met, and also the most tested. I think Larry, over the years, did a lot of things to see whether Arthur would abandon him and found out no, he wouldn't, no matter what he did.
He was the establishment guy and a lawyer and financially prudent and all the things that Larry wasn't. You know, he got Larry's finances in order. You know, his brother kept him alive.
But Arthur was a heterosexual man of his generation. So as much as there's a love of Larry, I also got a sense that there were at times a lack of understanding of what a gay man at this time is or would be going through or was like. Because of my brother, I started psychoanalysis very young. He was afraid the life of being gay was such an unhappy one, and he wanted to spare me the unhappiness of that. And in those days, shrinks really did try and get you over it. It was the brave shrink who would finally say, it's okay to like yourself for what you are. I didn't have any of those for a while, but they came. Through the 60s, when all the political shit was going down in America, I was living in London, which was the beginning of my life, really. The 60s, London was just coming to life, and it was so exciting. Mary Quant and the Beatles and Carnaby Street. And there I was, and you could live like a king on peanuts. I worked in the film industry. I was assistant to the president of Columbia and then United Artists, and my job was to find writers and find stories. We were the king of the heap. We made movies like Suddenly Last Summer and Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Strangelove and Pumpkin Eater, and I mean, go on and on. I was at this time being psychoanalyzed every day. And I grew up in London psychologically and creatively. I'd always wanted to write. I'd always been afraid to write. Like most people are terrified of writing, especially past a certain age. You're almost afraid to start. And through the analysis, I was able to work through all of that. And the first thing I really wrote was my screenplay for Women in Love, which turned out to give me a certain amount of confidence. That's when I became a writer.
You know, I've got the feeling that if I don't watch myself, I shall do something silly.
Why not do it? I used to do some Japanese-style wrestling once. I was never very good at it. Those things don't really interest me.
Don't they? Oh, they do me. How do you start?
Well, you can't do much in a stuffed shirt.
All right, let's strip and do it properly.
Very good. Now, you come at me any way you want, and I'll try and get out of it.
Admirable.
For gay men of my age, at some point, if they saw Women in Love, the scene they talk about and talk about and talk about is Alan Bates and Oliver Reed wrestling in front of the fireplace.
That's good.
The characters had a relationship prior to wrestling. They weren't characters meeting each other somewhere furtively. They were people of the same social circle. And it is about friendship taken a little bit further than traditionally taken.
Was it too much for you? No.
The response to Women in Love was overwhelming. It really catapulted Larry into the first rung of people making films and grappling with literature.
He was nominated for an Oscar for Women in Love, but I don't think that his personality was suited to the movie business because it's so extremely collaborative and you really have to make your peace with the commerce and art part of it. And Larry likes to do things his own way, and I can't imagine him collaborating very well.
From then, I just learned I did not like writing movies. You're only writing a blueprint for somebody else, basically, and it's also very hard to deal with intellectual ideas like you can in prose.
Living together, growing together, just being together, that's how it starts.
I made a lot of money as a screenwriter of movies that weren't made, a couple that unfortunately were.
Working together, just building together, that makes you strong.
The most money I made was on an awful, awful, awful movie. A musical version of Lost Horizon, the less said the better, but I made a fortune out of it.
His brother got a deal for him on Lost Horizon that may not have been the highest ever paid for a screenplay, but I think was pretty darn close. It was, at the time, a staggering sum.
And my brother invested it, and it was that which made me financially independent. And I've never really had to work since because my brother did so well.
A lot of money, a big deal, big bomb. I may be wrong and I never saw the picture, and isn't that odd? You don't see the picture anywhere. Maybe Larry is fleeing the movie business because it was such a debacle. Whatever happened to Lost Horizon, it made him so much money that he was able to do what he really wanted to do, and I guess what he wanted to do was get out of Hollywood.
I really started having anxiety attacks. And I called my shrink in New York, and he said, come home. So I went home. And it was his idea. He said, why don't you write a novel about the gay world? What you think about it? And it was a great idea. I'd never really looked at the gay world. I didn't belong to gay organizations. I had certainly had gay friends, and I certainly tricked and went to discos and all that, but I hadn't looked at the world.
I'm Vito Russo, and my guest this evening on Emerald City is Larry Kramer, the author of Faggots, a controversial new novel. Welcome, Larry.
Hi, Vito.
Faggots was this exposure into the nitty-gritty of the fast lane in New York City and the kind of sexual Olympics, so to speak, that are portrayed in the book.
New York was so intense and so dizzying, and it really was, oh, we're out of the cage, let's celebrate, let's do whatever we want, let's feel whatever we want, let's behave whichever way we want.
At some time or other between April and November, the 2,901,019 faggots in the New York City area come to Fire Island. Thousands and thousands of handsome men all over the place, wherever I could see, all touching, holding, hands or arms around each other, the brotherhood.
I loved writing that book. It made me laugh when I wrote it. I loved the language. I thought it was funny. But I was to learn very quickly otherwise. I open up Body Politic, and there is this review from this guy called George Whitmore. You must tell everybody you know not to buy this book. What had I done? And that's how the gay press reviewed it. I was just crucified.
I don't want a friendship with you. That's something else entirely. You don't fuck with your friends. And every faggot couple I know is deep into friendship and deep into fucking with everyone else but each other. And any minute, any bump appears in their commitment to infinitesimally obstruct their view, out they zip like petulant kids to suck someone else's lollipop instead of trying to work things out.
One of the things about faggots that made it so controversial is the idea that treating each other like meat devalues us as people and takes us away from our ability to love each other.
What's being manifested now in this pre-publication period are some very evident instances of people being angry at my being angry. How dare I talk about the bars or Fire Island or the meat racks or fist fucking, or can I say that on television?
Sure.
There's a complete, utter lack of morality, I think, in the gay world right now, because it's this determination to carve out what we're calling a new lifestyle, which, for as far as I can see, the only thing about it is that it's different from the straight lifestyle. We're going to go ass over backwards to be different just because we don't want to be like them.
In those days, a lot of us felt like the problems were entirely the fault of society. We didn't have our civil liberties. There was terrible homophobia out there. People hated us. And it was most of our troubles were society's fault. Larry was saying there's something wrong with our preoccupation with and emphasis on sex. It's too much.
When I first read the novel Faggots, I guess I was pretty horrified because I had worked hard as part of the sexual liberation movement, as part of the gay liberation movement, and promiscuity to us was not a dirty word. It was something that we fought for and believed in, the right to have sex when and where we wanted, with whom we wanted. And this novel seemed to me, and to many other activists, to be an act of self-hatred that was smearing all of us. Being told that we were just little sexual automatons, as the novel made us seem, was very unappealing to us.
Faggots was just angry and resentful, although when you read Faggots now, you really can see its broken heart. You know, Larry Kramer is someone with great, great heart.
You have decided, for the purposes of Faggots, to create a character who I assume is yourself, Fred Lemish,
Yes.
who is on a quest to find love before he's 40.
I'm 43.
There's a personal strand, which is the character of Dinky. Dinky is clearly the love of the life of the main character of Faggots, and as it turns out, Dinky would be the love of Larry Kramer's life in the person of David Webster, on whom he is based.
Faggots, it was about trying to get this one person, Dinky Adams, to be my lover, who I was desperately in love with, and who is my lover today, but that was a long time ago.
And I wanted to know why our love affair didn't work out, and I came to this realization that that no love affair, no relationship could withstand the baggage that we were putting on it by having so much sex with so many different people. Who can exist through that?
So who are you angry at? Are you angry at ourselves for the way we treat ourselves and each other, or at society for placing us in the kind of underground where that becomes possible?
No, you've hit on a very good point. I'm angry at myself. I'm angry, very angry at all of my friends. But leaving that aside, look, people can do whatever they want. They just don't have the right then to say it should have been better, because they haven't done a fucking thing to make it better.
Right.
They can't wake up at 60 years old and say, oh, poor me. Why have I never fallen in love? Why do I not have anything now except a lot of broken memories? Fuck it. You made your bed, you laid in it, in the mud of Fire Island, in the meat rack, you got what you deserve. Life isn't easy. Responsibilities aren't easy. Building a life together isn't easy. The rewards, I think, are great if you're willing to go beyond the orgasm.
I'm tired of using my body as a faceless thing to lure another faceless thing. I want to love a person. I want to go out and live in that world with that person, a person who loves me. So long, Dinky. Goodbye.
On July the 3rd, 1981, there was this scary article in the New York Times, now famous, by Dr. Lawrence Altman, rare cancer seen in 41 homosexuals. And it scared, I guess, just about everyone who read it. 2 summers before, people were dying mysteriously. And we had not put 2 and 2 together, but we were beginning to think it was part of the same thing.
I had a lover for 13 years. His name was Nick Rock. He became ill with what we thought was the flu. He would feel a little better and he would get up, and then he would, in the middle of the day, he'd come back home and he'd be back in bed. None of the doctors that he went to, nobody could tell him what was wrong.
The image that has always remained in my head was of Anno Porsche carrying Nick in his arms, literally around the pines, saying, does anybody have any idea what's wrong with Nick?
There were people missing. There were people who disappeared. There were people who just were gone, and people would whisper about them and talk about them.
It was surreal and frightening. We knew something terrible was happening to these people and bizarre.
Everybody kept saying, well, you know, this is really strange. There's so many people in the prime of their life should all of a sudden get these debilitating diseases. And then it turned out that the diseases were rather rare.
Doctors have even coined a new word for these conditions, GRIDs, gay-related infectious diseases. Of all these diseases, the one that's generated the most concern and even fear in the gay community is called Kaposi sarcoma. Kaposi sarcoma used to be known as simply a relatively rare form of cancer, but in the last few months, it's become an epidemic.
Before I got Kaposi's, I thought I was a pretty good-looking guy, average, but happy. And now I actually see myself fading away. It's just scary. It's scary the way I'm not what I was.
Our best guess is that it's somehow related to the gay lifestyle. That whether it's drug use, whether it's sexual activity, we're not completely sure at this time.
We were at the peak of Fire Island. No one wanted to hear this or believe it. It was pretty unbelievable to imagine that there was a cancer that was somehow related to homosexuality. We all thought that was absurd.
People were really, really resisting the idea that sex between 2 gay men could cause a fatal blood cancer. It literally spoiled the party. Nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to hear about it. But that's when Larry's qualities of being a scene maker and of being a person who could spoil the dinner party suddenly became heroic and useful.
Larry was zealously involved from the beginning as a leader, the leader, if you will. He galvanized all the earliest meetings among all the different people.
We had no name, we had no mission. You never knew who was going to come to a meeting or how many, and literally sometimes there would be 6 and sometimes there would be 30. We had to get word around everybody. We were going to go on Labor Day to Fire Island and canvass Fire Island with information. And we set up tables in the harbor, and we got a lot of flack from people, you know, gay cancer, why are you calling it gay cancer?
Kramer had a reputation as a naysayer.
Almost like a way of saying, you know, I told you so, to the community that had so vehemently rejected his novel Faggots, which turned out to be prophetic.
When we were out in the streets, the gay militants, he was laughing at us. He was staying in his comfortable little house in the Pines and thinking we were just trash. When he decided to become an activist, he was mad at everybody else in the Pines for not donating money for the new organization that he was founding.
Until January, it was very touch and go, and the membership was very floating. Paul Popham, Paul, and I began to take over the responsibilities.
Paul was a Green Beret, very responsible individual, had a really good job. He was one of the vice presidents for Irving Trust and had lived in the closet for a long time. Many of us were already out of the closet, but for Paul, I think it was a particularly difficult decision.
He was a kind of a daddy type, friendly and accessible, and he just was adored. And hundreds of people literally followed Paul Popham into this organization that was forming.
We have to formalize all of this somehow. We should give ourselves a name and a mission. In the course of the conversation, Paul Rappaport said, gay men certainly have a health crisis. And I said, Eureka, that's our name. Or I said, that's our name. And he said, what? I said, Gay Men's Health Crisis.
GMHC, Gay Men's Health Crisis, which was a service organization, and it was founded at a time when individual gay men were utterly baffled and didn't know what to do.
You got to remember, there was no virus found at that point. I mean, it was only hypothesis on doctors' part that it was caused by a virus.
There was no name for the disease. There were a lot of these people weren't out of the closet. There were no drugs for these people. There was no research. Totally hopeless.
And it was clear the city wasn't going to take care of us under Ed Koch.
One of the deputy mayors said to us, you know, a fire goes out in a school furnace on the west side, I get 3,000 phone calls in one afternoon. Don't talk to me about 300 faggots who fucked each other to death.
And it was certainly clear that the federal government under Ronald Reagan wasn't even going to recognize that there was an epidemic. So unless people in the community banded together and started taking care of ourselves, we would not be taken care of.
People began to come, to show up to do work. Roger McFarlane appeared out of nowhere and started a hotline with his own answering machine.
Hello?
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Hi, this is Roger McFarlane from the Gay Men's Health Crisis.
Oh, hi.
Hi, what can I do for you?
Yeah, I seem to have Kaposi's sarcoma, and I would like to know if you people know how to get Medicaid.
Sure. Who's your doctor, Bill?
When people began to realize that there was a real epidemic and we were the only organization, all 10 lines would be lit up constantly. You'd be answering one phone, the others would be ringing. It was complete pandemonium.
And people needed to know everything. Sometimes it was my partner, friend, has died next to me in bed, and I need to know a funeral home because I've called 6 of them and none will take him.
How do you begin to navigate maybe getting disability? Just all of these huge problems that fell on people.
We were like, you know, soldiers on the front line with a war going on, and the rest of the world doesn't know the war is going on.
Where's David Jackson? In the hospital. That's what I was afraid of. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
People were slipping through our fingers like grains of sand. There wasn't a day that went by when somebody didn't die.
Roger McFarlane would go off and visit patients in the hospital on his own, put dying patients together with their mothers, whom they hadn't seen in years.
There's one crisis counselor at the Gay Men's Health Crisis who went 3 times a day to the hospital to feed his patient and wash him, bathe him, because the hospital had him in such isolation that nobody would go into his room.
That was the summer when I repeatedly had people burned out of their apartments or beaten by the other tenants in their apartments or, in fact, set on fire in hospitals. This was routine. And everyone lay in shit. And no one passed to trade the finest institutions in this country. I'll say it out loud. Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York Hospital, Lenox Hill, New York University Medical Center. People lay in shit, and trays sat outside their room unless we went over there and did that.
We had to stop the roof from caving in, you know? There were the bodies were dropping. Literally, that's not a metaphor. And we had to take care of them.
What's killing him is a severe and very profound and maybe even permanent breakdown in their immune system. And it appears that this is the first epidemic of acquired immune deficiency of this nature ever recorded.
AIDS, AIDS, the most frightening initials in America today. They stand for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome.
San Antonio, Texas. Paramedics, worried about being infected by AIDS, take what they believe are reasonable precautions. They're fearful because so little is known about how the disease is transmitted.
Ambulance drivers have refused to take AIDS patients on occasion.
He asked one of the attendants, he told him that I had AIDS, and the person said outright, I'm not touching him. Just like that.
When you violate the laws of nature, you violate the laws of nature's God. And like driving faster than 55 miles an hour, you pay the fare.
We were treated pretty much like lepers. Everybody would just stare at you and mumble under their breath. A woman literally spat in Scott's face on the street and called him a diseased faggot and said, you know, you get what you deserve.
We cried an awful lot. because there were always these stories. And yet, at the same time, more and more people were coming to help us. And it was ironic that there was so much love and so much satisfaction. We all felt like we were well used, that we were out there fighting the fight.
This horrible disease gave this community a focus that it didn't have. It turned a community into a community. And by sense of community, I mean caring for and protecting others.
And then came Larry's 1,112 and counting. In this essay, Larry grabbed a hold of the community and shook it and said, if we don't stop pretty much everything we're doing right now, gay people will be wiped off the face of the earth, and that we have to stop having sex until we figure this thing out.
That said it all. You really didn't have to write another headline after that. The number was going to change, but it was always going to be and counting. And it was so direct and in your face. It was such an alarm bell going off.
For a lot of people, this was their wake-up call. This was the moment. A lot of people, though, felt differently. There were people who said, we've been in the closet for so long and we've had so much shame, and now we're out and we're expressing ourselves through our bodies, and he wants to take that away.
Paul felt very strongly that we had fought so hard for the sexual liberation, and he didn't think it was right that you scare people in any way. And I thought just the reverse. If scaring people is going to make people pay attention or stop endangering their lives, then so let them be scared.
A number of us were very concerned about telling people to stop having sex altogether.
Fuck with the condom or not with the condom, suck with the condom, not with the condom. No one would say any of those things. No one knew. It would have been sheer speculation and pretty reactionary at that. So, I mean, I'm speaking obviously to Kramer and a lot of people who at the time said we should tell everyone to stop fucking. We would have been out of business overnight.
It was not enough. It was not satisfactory to say, just say no.
We are putting out a leaflet that's going to blanket the whole city, 500,000 copies, that says, guys, until we know better, cool it. Give up your drugs, lay off the number of people you're having sex with until we know better, because if it is a virus and it is sexually transmitted, it is passing between us, so let's cool it for a while.
I was doing most of the media, not because I particularly wanted to do it, because there wasn't anybody else to do it. I mean, Paul was in the closet. He said, I can't do that, my boss will fire me. I would do it all, but I would do it my way, which was being very confrontational.
When you remember the almost daily attention that the media paid to Legionnaire's disease, to toxic shock, to the Tylenol scare, and this epidemic, which is the worst epidemic to hit America since polio, is not on the daily front pages of every newspaper. If this were happening to you and the white, straight, middle-class community, it would have been attended to a long time ago. The gay community has had to organize to take care of its own people. I'm a member of an organization of 200 volunteers, doctors, social workers, who are taking care of patients, doing things that the city should be doing, that the Red Cross should be doing. The Cancer Society will not give us 29 cents. Mayor Koch will not give us, has not yet given us 29 cents. We have to do it ourselves. We're fighting to get funding.
You have to come to Chicago to talk to Mayor Koch?
If I could get it in, I would say I think the reason that Koch is not paying attention to this is because he's gay and he's in the closet and he's terrified of being perceived as being too friendly to us. Every time that I called his liaison to the gay community, an openly gay prick called Herb Rickman, he'd either scream at me or hang up on me or say he was going to call back tomorrow, and he never did. I found out within 3 months what it was like to be treated like a faggot, like a nigger, like a spick, like a yid, all those terrible words. It's a wrong. I mean, it's just a wrong. We pay our taxes just like everybody else, and we have entitlements just like everybody else. I still think that there are 3 people responsible for the AIDS plague. One of them is Ed Koch, the other is Abe Rosenthal, who ran the New York Times, and the third is obviously Ronald Reagan. When you have a health emergency, you tell the world and you do something about it. It's called responsibility. And I would say things like that, and just simply did not endear me to this organization.
If you're going to get money from grants and from city and state and feds, you can't be screaming and yelling at the mayor on one hand and taking his money with the other.
Gay men's health crisis is not allowed to be political.
Right.
And it is time to be very, very political. So I am now prefacing my remarks and my appearances in public when I shoot off my mouth as saying I am not speaking for gay men's health crisis.
Larry took a bunch of brochures and threw them at the deputy mayors. I think he called them murderers.
They were all scared of me. I mean, they knew I had a temper.
I think that made Paul Popham's mind up that if we got a meeting with the mayor, we couldn't bring Larry because he could hurt the organization. But then again, we only had 2 people when the time came, and it had to be Paul and myself.
So they were the 2, and I felt betrayed. I said to Paul, I'm going or I quit. He said something to the effect that he had polled the board and that they expected this, and in essence, so quit. They were calling my bluff.
We had grown into an organization, not a bunch of guys that were going to follow somebody's whim. And Larry got very upset with that and quit.
Any event, in such ways is history made.
This is great. I miss our exercise sessions.
Look up.
There you go.
Exactly. Don't look out. Look up.
Pretty soon we'll be lifting
Good.
weights again, right?
Yes. This is great.
This is fantastic. I'm like no support now, pretty much.
Me too.
Awesome. Just in
catch
case.
him.
Just in case.
Beautiful. Look at this. Don't look down.
Awesome.
Okay,
Larry.
so this is what we got to do to get out of here. This is really important.
This is really good.
You're gonna get 2. Here you go. One more. Great.
Have a little more Ensure there. Okay.
Doesn't look terrible. Looks like broccoli, potatoes, and chicken.
That's yesterday.
No, it looks a little like yesterday's, but this
is yesterday.
No, they just brought it right now.
Where's the bread?
I'm getting it.
I'm so bossy.
What's new?
I got kicked out of Gay Men's Health Crisis. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I took the next plane to London. I knew that I had to write something. I had to get the message out.
When Larry fled New York, came to London, stayed with me in my parents' apartment, there was a small table. Larry plunked down a typewriter on that small table, and the next day began to write The Normal Heart. Larry was doing what he is programmed to do, which is turn life into art.
The first draft came out in no more than a total of 6 weeks. I just wrote it. I think probably because I was not writing fiction, I was writing what actually happened. The epidemic itself is not fiction and is so appalling, and the memory of the people who were dear to me is still so important that I just thought that had to be done in a almost documentary fashion.
Where is he? I'm an hour late.
An hour and a half. Where's Mickey?
He's not with me, lamb chop. I've been up at Bellevue. Put a sweet dying child together with his mama. They hadn't seen each other for 15 years. He'd never told her he was gay, so he didn't want to see her now. He'd been refusing to see her for weeks. He was furious with me when I waltzed in with her, and it was a real weeper, Mama holding her son, and he's dead now. There are going to be a lot of mamas flying into town, not understanding why their sons have suddenly upped and died from pneumonia.
And the person in The Normal Heart who Larry is probably hardest on is the Larry Kramer character.
You have to tell gay men to stop having sex.
Sorry, what?
Somebody has to. Why not you?
Well, wouldn't it be better coming from you? It's a preposterous request.
It only sounds harsh. You wait a few more years, it won't sound so harsh.
You realize you are talking about millions of men who have singled out promiscuity to be their principal political agenda. The one that they would die before abandoning. How do you deal with that?
You tell them they may die.
You tell them.
I was not trying to present myself as a hero. I was trying to present myself as a pain in the ass. I was pushy, and I was difficult to get along with, and I was obnoxious, and I did alienate all these people who were my good friends.
To have a play about something that's going on right outside of the walls of the theater, right at that moment, that's what made it almost unbearably devastating.
The horror of this disease gives the character Ned a purity of focus that I think he didn't have prior to that time. And I have a feeling that very much so happened with Larry. There was a monster that was so big and so mean that all of his anger that was looking for a place to focus itself had a very pure and very clear and very clean focus.
But let's face it, AIDS forced a lot of us to get very pragmatic, very quick, because we were dealing with ourselves, our friends, our lovers being sick and dying.
In honor of those who have died, we ask you to mention the names of your loved ones.
Release your balloons. Call out your friends. Call them out.
John St. Jack. Harlan Ford. Donald King. David Basaratu. I still love you, Kevin. You'll always be with me, David.
By 1987, it became increasingly clear that there was a political dimension to this crisis. We were being allowed to die because we were not very well liked. It was just clear that unless we seized power ourselves, we were not going to get taken care of.
In early March of '87, Larry told me that he was going to be giving the speech at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center, and that he was going to call for a civil disobedience group to do demonstrations like the anti-war movement.
It was a packed house, and I was angry, and the speech reflected the anger, as anger seems to have motivated most of my organizational work.
He said, okay, this half of the room stand up. And they did, and he said, you're all going to be dead within a year.
Half of us are going to be dead in this room in a couple of years if we don't get off our asses and take to the streets.
Join them! Join them! Join them! Join us!
And somebody stood up and said, I've always had this idea. I thought it would be great to name a group ACT UP.
You can get it too! 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 Release the drugs!
We were united in anger because the occasion of ACT UP was such a fiery speech that Larry gave that led to an angry demonstration out in Wall Street.
This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning.
There were about 500 people out here, angry people, who came to protest the FDA, the slowness in getting drugs online.
There are 8 drugs that the FDA is sitting on. We cannot wait 10 years for drugs to be processed through the FDA. AIDS patients don't have enough time to live.
Release those drugs! Release those drugs!
How do we get the FDA, which is a terrible, terrible bureaucracy? It's labyrinthine. It's almost out of a Russian novel, the FDA. Right. How do you get it through there?
Release those drugs! Release those drugs!
We are hoping that Frank Young, whom we have hanged in Epping, he's the head of the FDA, will be so ashamed by all of this that he will get his people off of their tushies and pushing these drugs through.
New York City, your mayor is gay. Put some pressure on the FDA. New York City, your mayor is gay.
By the time of ACT UP, we had the troops. Guys were angry, patients were angry, which didn't exist when I started Gay Men's Health Crisis.
How many people did you kill today?
I knew one thing: I didn't want it to have a board of directors, and I wanted it to be based on anger. and protest.
Cut the stalling, cut the red tape. Cut the stalling, cut the red tape. Cut the stalling, cut the red tape. Healthcare is a right. Healthcare is a right.
Pump up the
Healthcare is a right. Healthcare is a right.
We never had a leader. We had committees, we had subcommittees, we had ad hoc groups, we had affinity groups, but we never had a leader.
There will be a memorial service on 3 p.m. on Saturday, March 3rd.
And Larry, you know, he was sort of like the father of the group. Everybody attributed to him the fact that the group existed. So there was a lot of respect. A lot of the younger people just looked up to him because he was so adamant about what we had to do.
Clark named ACT UP as the beneficiary of an insurance policy that he had.
He could get up and speak anytime. He never had to be called on.
4 companies are fucking suing each other over the patent, and we can't get the drug because of their greed. Larry. Oh, be quiet. That's the end of it. I'm sorry.
People would always cringe when he would go to speak. You know, they would wait for him to say something terrible.
You know, I cut him off and I said, Larry, it's not your turn to speak. Someone else is speaking. You have to wait your turn. And he said, you're a Nazi. He called me a Nazi. He said, you're a Nazi. People are dying and you're, fussing over how to print the flyer.
In the middle of this painful conversation about whether or not it's appropriate to make T-shirts, Larry Kramer jumps up and screams, you sissies, people are dying and you're talking about T-shirts.
Sissies! People are dying and you're worrying about T-shirts. And you want to talk about T-shirts? You fucking sissies want to talk about T-shirts.
People are dying and you're talking, And that's the way he felt to the very end. He felt that way. You don't want to waste time talking. You want to do stuff.
Act up, stand tall. Tomorrow morning at City Hall. Act up, stand tall. Tomorrow morning at City Hall. Act up, stand tall. It's time to march on City Hall. Act up, stand tall. It's time to march on City Hall. Act up, stand tall. It's time to march on City Hall. Act up, stand tall. It's time to march on City Hall.
I'm here because people with AIDS live in the streets in New York City, and that's the policy of this administration. It's not a mistake. It's the way Koch has it set up, and we're here to say if they're going to live in the streets, we're going to block the streets too.
We who are proud of being gay are sick to death of being made victims by those who are ashamed of being gay.
Healthcare is the right. Healthcare is the right.
We really were doing theater, street theater, and we had a lot of very talented people. The analogy is really with the movie business. I was trained in the movie business, and you call it direct action, I call it putting on a show. The years of anger of ACT UP were incredible. We all loved each other to death. I don't think we gave a good flying F what anybody thought of us, and that was part of our strength. They didn't like us tough shit. The church demo really did get a lot of bad publicity.
Many Catholics were angered by this demonstration at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York to criticize the church's opposition to homosexuality and condoms.
And the next Monday's meeting, everybody was terrified because the papers had been so cruel to us. And I got up and I said, are you crazy? This is the best thing that ever happened to us. We're no longer limp-wristed, effeminate drag queens or whatever they always put on television. And that image changed overnight. united in the anger, and we were united in the deaths of so many people.
He so wanted this plague gone. You know, he took every kind of thing that didn't work as a failure that was going to mean somebody was dead. And this was before he knew that he could die. You know, I mean, it was before he knew that he was infected.
The whole thing about ACT UP is results. That's all I was interested in. Results. How do we get these fucking drugs? That's what it was all about. How do we get them?
Crisis knows no borders. The AIDS crisis knows no borders. The AIDS crisis knows no borders. The AIDS crisis knows no borders.
And so depending upon who you believe, there are 60 to 100 separate drugs waiting to be tested. And that's an unacceptable situation for me because I'm going to be dead before 2 years is up.
We have educated ourselves. We know more than the system knows.
I first met Larry at an international AIDS meeting in Montreal. I was, in his mind, the face of the federal government. So if he wanted to lash out at the federal government, who would he lash out to? And it was me. He really got my attention when he wrote an article in the San Francisco Examiner that was this big bold letters, an open letter to Anthony Fauci, an incompetent idiot. I mean, that got everybody's attention, particularly mine.
It's almost as if we're light years ahead of you, and we hope that you listen to us.
I ran into him on the streets of Montreal, like two generals in a war on opposite sides coming together for a little bit of a truce and saying, you know, we're both soldiers and maybe we're on the same side and we're not on opposite sides. He was being totally opposite from the fist-raising, in-your-face Larry. And we found out at the end of that even though we still disagreed on how to do things, we didn't disagree on what needed to be done.
He was awful in the beginning, but Tony, to his credit, let us in.
So that started a process that over years matured into having activists at our planning meeting, having activists at our clinical trials.
We rewrote the rules by which AIDS drugs were approved. It was no longer enough to critique the federal government. We had to come up with the very particulars of plans.
Activists bring a very special insight into the disease that they can actually be helpful in the way that we design our scientific approaches. We must join together, for together we are a formidable force with a common goal.
But I know that if ACT UP hadn't come along and kicked his ass, we would be light years behind where we are now.
We're here today because we're going to take the ashes of some of our friends and drop them on the steps of the White House because we're not going to take it any longer. We were fearless in what we would do. We didn't care if we were arrested. We didn't care if you didn't like what we did. Tough shit. We were dying, and you only had to go to a meeting on Monday night to be overwhelmed with that sense of people who were sick, people who were dying.
Okay, this is probably the last time I'm going to be here. You know what life is like? Life is like waking up at 3 a.m. unable to go back to sleep because I have to go to the bathroom. I have constant diarrhea. My GI system resembles that of a worm. I've eaten a spoonful of Cheerios and shat it out in 1 minute. My weight has dropped from 145 to 118. I weighed myself today, 105. Lose 30% of your body weight and you're basically dead. I am a corpse. I am at the totally self-serving stage that I want every action to help save my life. I thought we were in ACT UP New York because we'd seen too many of our friends die and would do anything to prevent another death. We have obviously failed. And if anybody applauds, they're just applauding their own stupidity. Thank you. I have to go now. I have to go. I don't want to talk to anybody. I've had it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I couldn't go into a meeting without 6 or 7 guys coming over to me and saying, what's happening? Is anything happening? Because they were sick and they were getting worse. Have I got a chance? Have you heard of anything? And of course, most of the time you had to say no, but it made you go out there and fight harder. It made you, be even nastier to Tony Fauci.
The kinds of inroads that are made, as small as they are, science works in small building blocks of knowledge.
Oh, Tony, stop it. Yes, the answer could come tomorrow. Why do you automatically take such a negative attitude? You're not going to get it. Let me finish. Tony, all of that is bureaucratic bullshit, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself. There are 1,000 things that can be done to make all of this happen faster, and you know it. And that's the part of you that makes me so angry. Well, Tony, more than anyone in this world, knows how awful everything is, knows what has to be done, and yet he can never say it in public like I can say it in public.
I think it's unfair to the president to say that he's just sort of sitting back and taking it business as usual. And I think deep down you know that.
Tony, I'm going to say something. When you talk like that, I hate you.
I know, Larry.
When he didn't think things were going right, he'd rage out at us, at me, at the government, at them.
AIDS is intentional genocide! How long are you going to let your presidents get away with murder? You are not changing one goddamn thing. Your passivity and your limp liberalism and your cowardly determination to believe there is nothing you can do, should you ever have an inkling to do so, beyond your helping to bury everybody.
I would go to meetings with pharmaceutical companies and the guy next to me be a scientist, and he would literally be shaking. And I would turn to somebody else and I say, why is he, Dr. Blah Blah, shaking? And he said, he's afraid of you. And I thought, oh my God, poor little timid Larry. But I learned, hey, it's useful. It's useful for him to be afraid of me. It's useful of the pharmaceutical company to be afraid of ACT UP. And we learned how to play it.
When the change finally came, it came with breathtaking swiftness.
The FDA has approved a new class of AIDS drugs that some researchers say could be the breakthrough they've been waiting for.
The hope comes from a new class of medications called protease inhibitors. Combined with older medications, they knock out the AIDS virus so it cannot be detected in the bloodstream. Doctors say patients feel better and often symptoms disappear. This man had Kaposi sarcoma, the AIDS-related skin cancer. Now he has only a scar.
Now, in someone before we had the protease inhibitors, this thing by now would be a plaque as big as the palm of your hand or larger, and might be extending over the upper whole third of the thigh. So this is really dramatic.
I think we're talking about a major advance in the therapy of HIV-infected individuals.
Writer and longtime AIDS activist Larry Kramer.
I'm very excited. I've seen my own health improve. I've seen the health of an enormous number of my friends improve, and I haven't seen anybody decline.
I can't describe the boost and the rush I got in the month after starting the protease inhibitor.
There is no question that it all took longer than it should have. Huge amounts of time. And those drugs are out there because of us. And that cannot be disputed in any history that's written. They would not be out there but for ACT UP.
The AIDS drug cocktail enabled, hundreds of thousands of people around the world to have years added on to their lives.
What ACT UP did was the most important chapter in the history of medical activism, not only in the United States, but of our time anywhere. There is nothing remotely comparable.
If you look at medicine It's broken up into two major areas. There's medicine before Larry Kramer, and then there's medicine after Larry Kramer and his army of activists. The world of science didn't get it. They got it because it was their lives and their people and their loved ones, and they turned it around. The transforming role, that involvement of the afflicted community in how scientists and public health officials think about how you approach a disease.
The schism that destroyed ACT UP was as heartbreaking as being thrown out of GMHC. I didn't see it coming, and then when I did see it coming, I couldn't stop it. We had all become very full of ourselves because we were getting successful. We were having meetings with all the big deal people in Washington, which made the people who were not a part of those meetings, which was basically most of the organization,
upset, jealous, and feel very excluded. We destroyed each other. We destroyed the greatest thing we had created.
Once we got the decent drugs, which were the mid to late 90s, people just started going back and doing what they did. That broke my heart. That broke my heart. That set me into a true depression that lasted quite a while. HIV infections are up as much as 40%. You cannot continue to allow yourselves and each other to act and live like this. I do not understand why some of you believe that because we have drugs that deal with the virus more or less effectively, that it is worth the gamble to have unprotected sex. These drugs are not easy to take. There are many side effects. I must allow at least one day out of every week or two to really feel shitty, to have no sleep, to be constipated, to have diarrhea, to require blood tests and monitoring at hospitals or in doctors' offices, and to have the shakes. The shakes, which come often, are not useful when you use a mouse or reading a newspaper or with a lover in your arms. There was a gay writers' conference in Key West. Everybody read portions of what they were writing about, and it was all stories about fucking and sucking and meat racks. And I mean, it was like AIDS had never happened. And I said, you know, we're more than our cocks. You know, we're more than the meat rack. We do great things. We have relationships. We're business people. We make movies. You know, we're like everyone else. Why is our culture entirely based on our cocks? The definition of gay should not be just sexual.
I belong to a culture that includes Marcel Proust, Walt Whitman, Tennessee Williams, Alexander the Great, so many popes and cardinals you wouldn't believe. Mr. Green Beret, did you know that it was an openly gay Englishman who's responsible for winning World War II? His name's Alan Turing, and he cracked the Germans' Enigma code. After the war was over, he committed suicide because he was so hounded for being gay. Why don't they teach any of that in the schools? A gay man is responsible for winning World War II. If they did, maybe he wouldn't have killed himself, and you wouldn't be so terrified of who you are. That's how I want to be remembered. As one of the men who won the war.
Not enough of us are proud enough of being gay. Not enough of us identify first and foremost as gay. It's got to be the most important thing in our lives, and it isn't for most of us. I'm writing a very long book, The American People, which is a history of America that goes back to the beginning. And I have discovered that many, many people in our history were gay. Many people were gay. We are entitled to our history. We are entitled to know who these people were. I don't think you can be a people until you have a history. I know our history. Maybe because other people don't, they feel not a part of anything.
How are you? This is wonderful. So yesterday he was fabulous. Today he's just kind of ICU syndrome.
That happens.
So that's what all the people, they should come in. You should all come in.
Welcome everyone to a happy occasion, the marriage of Larry Kramer and David Webster. I think before we go on, we should at least mention that were it not for Larry, this ceremony in this place might well not be happening. So let us begin. Larry.
Larry.
Larry. Do you, Larry, take this man, David, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health, in joy and adversity, as long as ye both shall live?
Yes.
Yes, you do? How about nodding your head?
Nod your head.
Okay. David,
Yes.
do you, David, take this man, Larry, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health, in joy and adversity, from here to eternity?
Yes.
And now, by the power vested in me by the laws of the state of New York, it gives me great pleasure to pronounce you husband and husband.
Great. Yes. Look, they all signed it. From the surgical ICU units. This is their first wedding. Isn't that amazing?
I'm at Larry Kramer's wedding today. I am alive today because of him. Larry Kramer is the one that spurred the government, spurred the Koch administration. He was the pain in the ass that everybody needed him to be. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of men, women, and especially children that are alive today because of Larry Kramer. I am here today to honor him at his wedding, and I am very grateful for his life.